Welcome back to Newsroom. President Obama heads to 3 college campuses beginning today to push Congress to keep interest rates from doubling on federal subsidized student loans. Take a look at the figures. Americans owe $870 billion in student loan debt, surpassing what they owe on their cars and credit cards. Those under 40 years of age carry the most debt, $580 billion. Cryn Johannsen is founder and executive director of All Education Matters. She's an advocate for student loan forgiveness. Welcome, Cryn.
Thank you for having me.
We're glad you're here. You say freezing interest rates doesn't even begin to address the problem. Explain.
Well, no, it does not. I mean, I think that it's obvious that it needs to be done. And I wanted to add that with Romney coming out in support, I applaud him. But I actually wonder if there's something that has to do with Representative Virginia Foxx, who's on the, she's a chairperson on the Committee of Higher Education. She recently came out saying she essentially had very little tolerance for student loan debtors. There's been quite a backlash to this, so I'm actually wondering if that's maybe some sort of PR damage control.
Yeah, that's a whole nother
But when it comes to the, you're exactly right. But when it comes to the magnitude of the crisis, which for 3 years I've been arguing is a student lending crisis, and I'm presently working on a book, fixing or freezing, maintaining these fixed interest rates doesn't do anything. And I know that you mentioned that I have advocated for forgiveness of all loans. There are groups that are doing that, and I think that that's incredibly admirable. But at the same time, if you consider this to be a bubble, and some experts estimate that now outstanding student loan debt is at $1 trillion, what is going to happen in the future of, let's just say, which would obviously be great if all loans were completely forgiven,
so what
what's going to happen in 10 years from now?
What are you suggesting, Cryn? What's the answer?
Well, that's a really good question, Carol. And the thing that gets down to it, when you have a problem of this magnitude, there is not a silver bullet solution. And actually, I've worked with congressional leaders and offices to discuss multi-solution approaches, because one of the things, too, is that when you hear the word forgiveness, a lot of people who might not have student loans or have paid them down, some of them are not sympathetic to that, as you can understand, because it also makes the assumption that the person who has borrowed the money is somehow to blame. Because when we think of the word forgiveness, what do you think about, Carol?
Well, I don't know if people care what I think, but I think many people think that when you talk about loan forgiveness, it's like, well, I paid off my student loan debts, and what are you going to do, forgive all credit card debt too to get us out of the hole? I think that's
right.
What many people think.
Yeah, and that's my point. My point about the term forgiveness is in my view, it assumes that the person is almost committed a sin, and it's as if they're on their knees begging for something. And really, I think when we're looking at the questions and we're looking at the problems and how this has been created, there are a lot of institutions that have created this problem. We should be turning the question around instead of just considering it about, considering student loan debtors wanting their debts wiped off, and saying, well, gee, how did we get to this point? How can we come up with long-term solutions that actually don't just hurt students, but also current students and prospective students?
That's a tough one. Let's bring in Christine Roman. She's our business correspondent, and she's been breaking down the numbers. So just on this idea of loan forgiveness, maybe for a year, maybe forever, I don't know, Christine, what would it mean to our economy?
Well, it would mean either higher taxes or a bigger deficit, because 85% of that big pile of outstanding student loan debt is backed by the federal government. So that means that taxpayers would be forgiving other taxpayers' student loans. That's what it would mean on its face. And Mark Kantorowicz from FinWeb, he's really the expert in all matters student loans. He said it's just not feasible. It's been a big push of the Occupy Wall Street a movement and other groups that have sprung out of that, but simply not feasible to ask Americans to raise their taxes to pay for someone else's education. There are things that you can do, however. First of all, you can get a job market going a little bit better so people have a job to go to. That's a really important part of this. Also, people have to remember to keep the borrowing down. Mark Kantorowicz and others are pointing out that you have people borrowing too much money, in part because their parents don't have the savings in their house house anymore, but a couple of rules of thumb. Remember, you can't get rid of your student debt in bankruptcy. So you have to be prepared that even if you're not paying your loans right now, you go into bankruptcy, a judge is not going to forgive them. Don't borrow more than you're expected in your first year out. That means if you're going to be a social work major or a general studies major or liberal arts, you can't borrow a ton of money. You just can't. You got to save for it. You got to go to a community college. Don't borrow more than $10,000 for each year of school. And even that, Mark Hansen says, is too much. A lot of personal finance people say that is still too much. But you got a problem here where a lot of borrowing at the same time there's a weak jobs market has led to this big bubble in debt. One last thing I want to say, Carol, is think about it this way. You have $60 to $70 billion every year that's going to student loan payments. Putting that kind of stimulus in the economy, $60 to $70 billion a year, some economists say there's actually better things you can do to stimulate an economy and grow jobs than paying off student loan debt.
Christine Romans, Cryn Johannsen, thanks so much for the conversation.
You're welcome.
Still to come on Newsroom, a surprising act.